Do you believe a place exists where the Spanish once looked at an entire island and decided it was worthless? No gold, no fertile soil for plantations, nothing but cactus, dry wind and stone. They called it Islas Inútiles, the useless islands. And yet, that same island would go on to become one of the most important seaports in the Caribbean. It would become a meeting point of Europe, Africa, and the Americas. It would survive slavery, colonization, and isolation, and somehow turn all of it into color, into music, into identity. Today, that island has a population of just 158,000 people. It is smaller than most cities you've never heard of. And yet this year, that same tiny nation walked onto the world's biggest stage, the FIFA World Cup, and held one of South America's strongest teams to a scoreless draw. A place once dismissed as useless just shocked the world. This is Curaçao. Curaçao is a small island in the southern Caribbean. Only about 65 kilometers from the coast of Venezuela. It is dry, it is rocky. It does not look like the Caribbean most people picture in their heads. So here is the question this video will answer. How does a place built on land the Spanish once threw away end up producing one of the most colorful cities in the world? One of the most resilient cultures in the Caribbean. And now, a national football team that made history. This island has been called useless. It has been a center of trade. It has been a center of suffering. And somehow, out of all of that, its people built something the rest of the world is only now starting to notice. To understand how, we have to start with the land itself and the people who learned to survive on it against every expectation. Curaçao covers just 444 square kilometers. A narrow strip of land floating between the Caribbean Sea and the coast of South America. Seen from above, it looks nothing like the tropical postcard most people expect. There are no rainforests here. No endless rows of palm trees swaying over white sand. Instead, the land is dry, limestone, cactus and thorny scrub, all stretched out beneath a relentless sun. But on Curaçao, nature isn't just scenery. It's what shapes how people live, how they build, and even how they think. The island sits outside the main Caribbean hurricane belt, which sounds like luck until you realize what replaced that danger. Rain is rare here, Some years, barely 550 millimeters fall across the entire island. So everything that survives on Curaçao has had to learn the same lesson. Don't fight the conditions. Adapt to them. You can see that lesson written into the landscape itself. The divi-divi trees that dot the hillsides don't grow straight up like trees elsewhere. They bend permanently, sharply, shaped by the constant northeast trade winds that never really stop blowing. They don't resist the wind. They lean into it. And over decades, that surrender becomes their signature. Twisted branches that have become a symbol of the island itself. Even the animals here have had to evolve around scarcity. In the dry valleys near Christoffel Mountain, a rare subspecies of white-tailed deer has adapted to heat and drought that would push most species elsewhere. They are quiet, careful, built for conservation rather than abundance. That, more than anything, is the real geography of Curaçao. Not lush, not generous, but a place that teaches everything. Living on it, the same quiet rule. Bend, adapt, and you will last. There's a saying people on Curaçao like to repeat. Almost like a small joke at the island's own expense. If you don't like the weather, just wait 5 minutes. It sounds like something tourists say about anywhere. But on Curaçao, it's almost literally true. The sun can be blazing directly overhead. The sky completely clear. And within minutes, a sudden gust of wind rolls in off the sea. Or a short, sharp rain shower passes through and vanishes just as fast. The island doesn't really have seasons the way most of the world understands. It has moods, and those moods shift constantly. Without warning, without apology. At first, that might sound like a small, forgettable detail. But spend enough time here, and you start to notice that this unpredictability says something deeper about how people actually live. Nobody on Curaçao plans their day around perfect conditions. Because perfect conditions don't really exist here. Plans bend, schedules loosen. A sudden change in weather isn't treated as a disaster. It's treated as completely normal. Something to shrug at and move through. That flexibility isn't just a way of handling weather. It's a way of handling life. On an island that has been passed between empires, surrounded by economic uncertainty, and shaped by forces far outside its control. Learning not to panic when conditions shift has become something close to a survival skill. The weather doesn't just describe Curaçao's climate. It describes its mindset. Stay calm, stay adaptable, and trust that whatever comes next, you'll find a way through it. The same way the sun always comes back out, 5 minutes later. Now here's something almost nobody outside the Caribbean expected. In the middle of a year defined by dry heat, quiet resilience, and an island that has spent centuries being underestimated, Curaçao did something no nation its size has ever done. With a population of only about 158,000 people, smaller than many single neighborhoods in major cities, Curaçao qualified for the 2026 FIFA World Cup. It became the smallest nation in the tournament's history to ever reach football's biggest stage. Their opening match was against Germany, four-time world champions. The final score read 7-1. Headlines the next morning called it a disaster. A mismatch, exactly what people expected from the smallest team in the room. But buried inside that scoreline was something the headlines missed. Curaçao scored against Germany, a nation of 158,000 people put the ball past one of the most dominant defenses in world football. On the biggest stage that exists, 6 days later in Kansas City, the story continued. Curaçao faced Ecuador, a stronger, more experienced South American side. In goal stood Eloy Room, 37 years old. A goalkeeper who had already lived through every kind of football disappointment a career can offer. For 90 minutes, Room became a wall, save after save after save, as Ecuador threw everything at him. By the final whistle, he had made 15 saves, the most by any goalkeeper in a single World Cup match. Without extra time since records began in 1966. Tying Tim Howard's legendary mark from 2014. The match ended scoreless, Curaçao's first ever point at a World Cup. Just existing on that stage was already the win. Everything after that, a goal against the champions, a point against South America, was simply proof of something the island has always known about itself. Never count us out. To understand how Curaçao got here, you have to go back centuries. Long before football, long before tourism. To the people who first called this island home. The Cactus, part of the Arawak people, lived on Curaçao for over 1,000 years before anyone in Europe knew it existed. Inside the limestone caves at Hato, they left behind carvings. More than 1,500 years old. Faces and spirals etched into stone that still survive today. When the Spanish arrived in the late 15th century, much of that original population was taken or destroyed within a few generations. On an island already dismissed as worthless, even its first people were nearly erased from history. Then, in 1634, the Dutch took the island from Spain. Not for its land, but for its harbor. What followed were some of the darkest decades in Curaçao's story, as the island became a major center of the Atlantic slave trade. But identity doesn't only come from what was taken. It comes from what survived. Papiamento is proof of that. A Creole language built from Portuguese, Spanish, Dutch, West African languages, and indigenous influence. It was once dismissed as informal, unworthy of serious use. Today, it's spoken in homes, in schools, in government, on the street. Not as a relic of the past, but as something people choose every single day. That's the pattern that repeats across Curaçao's history. Things that could have been lost: language, memory, identity, were instead kept alive on purpose. Not out of nostalgia, but as quiet, daily acts of resistance. If there is one name that captures the soul of Curaçao, it is Tula. In 1795, on the Nip plantation in the western part of the island, an enslaved man named Tula made a decision that history almost never recorded. France had abolished slavery, so Tula reasoned, simply and powerfully, that freedom must also belong to Curaçao. He refused to keep working. What started as one voice spread fast. Within days, roughly 4,000 enslaved people rose together. Nearly a quarter of the island's entire population at the time. For weeks they marched across dry, sunburned fields, demanding something that should never have needed demanding: the right to live as human beings. The uprising was eventually crushed. Tula was captured, tortured, and publicly executed as a warning to others. But warnings don't always work the way they're intended to. Tula's death didn't erase what he started. It transformed him into the most powerful moral symbol in Curaçao's history. Every year on August 17th, the island stops to remember him, not as a footnote, but as the moment courage became part of the island's identity. No law forced anyone to march beside Tula in 1795. No outside power demanded it. It was a choice made by ordinary people at the highest possible cost. That single decision says more about who the people of Curaçao are than almost anything else in this story. When something is unjust, they don't wait for permission to resist it. There's an assumption most people make about small, isolated places. That distance creates distance. That being cut off from the rest of the world makes a place colder. More closed, harder to enter. Curaçao breaks that assumption completely. Visitors who spend real time here often describe the same feeling. Almost word for word, low crime. Almost no sense of danger. A kind of openness that doesn't exist in larger, busier places. One outsider summed it up simply. They felt happy here, safe here. Free from the noise and tension they were used to back home. Part of that comes from scale. On an island of 158,000 people, with a population density of around 356 people per square kilometer. Everyone is, in some way, only a few connections away from everyone else. Neighborhoods aren't anonymous. Faces are familiar. Reputation actually means something. Because word travels fast on an island this size. But the deeper reason runs further back than population density. It's the same thread that runs through Tula's uprising, through the survival of Papiamentu, through a tiny football team refusing to be intimidated by Germany or Ecuador. Trust here isn't something imposed from above. By police, by government, by rules. It's something that simply exists, built over generations of people who had no one to rely on but each other. Isolation on Curaçao never created distance. It created closeness. And that closeness still shapes daily life here. In ways most visitors only notice after they've already started to feel it themselves. For most of its history, Curaçao's biggest challenge wasn't a lack of ambition. It was geography, a small island far from anywhere, with a harbor that needed connecting. The Dutch recognized that problem the moment they arrived in 1634. Kattegat Bay offered something rare in the Caribbean. A deep, sheltered, natural harbor, wide enough to hold the largest ships of any era. But a harbor only solves half a problem. The other half was splitting the city itself in two. Willemstad sits on either side of St. Anna Bay, divided by water that ships needed to pass through constantly. So in 1888, the island built something almost absurd for its time. The Queen Emma Bridge, a wooden pontoon bridge floating directly on the water. Locals still call it, affectionately, our swinging old lady. Whenever a large ship needs to enter the harbor, the entire bridge simply swings open. like a door politely stepping aside, then swings back into place once the ship has passed. It still operates exactly that way today, more than a century later. Decades after that, in 1974, the island solved the same problem on an entirely different scale. The Queen Juliana Bridge rises 56 meters above the water, tall enough for massive oil tankers and cargo ships to pass beneath without the bridge needing to move at all. One bridge floats, the other towers. Together, they tell the same story from two different eras. A small island that never had the luxury of waiting for someone else to solve its problems. So it simply engineered its own solutions. Quietly, without ever making a show of it. From the outside, an island this small, this dry, this isolated, looks like it shouldn't be able to support itself. And yet the numbers tell a very different story. Curaçao's economy generates close to $3 billion in GDP, with a per capita income of around $27,600, high for the region, and far higher than what the island's size or natural resources alone would suggest. Most of that comes not from agriculture or manufacturing, but from something less visible: services, tourism, offshore finance, shipping, and communications make up the overwhelming majority of the island's economy. In a sense, Curaçao took the same lesson it learned from its harsh climate and applied it to its economy. It couldn't compete on raw resources, so instead it built a reputation. It became a trusted, stable financial hub in the Caribbean, a logistics point between continents. A place international business could rely on. Exactly the same way Shottegat Bay once made it a hub for shipping centuries earlier. There's a different mindset built into that kind of economy. In big cities, the instinct is often to compete aggressively just to survive. To outpace your neighbor before they outpace you. On Curaçao, the model has leaned the other way. Build trust. Build a reputation. Do a smaller number of things, but do them in a way people can depend on. It's not flashy. It rarely makes headlines. But for an island once written off as having nothing of value, that quiet, disciplined approach to its economy has become one of its most underestimated strengths. No place is perfect, and a story about Curaçao that ignored its problems wouldn't be telling the truth. Beneath the color and the calm, real tensions remain. The population is aging, with a median age of 48 and more elderly residents than children. A sign of younger generations leaving for work or education abroad and not always returning. That quiet realization reshapes a small island over time. Even when nothing dramatic seems to happen on the surface. Cost of living is another pressure. Inflation has eased recently, but daily expenses remain high relative to local wages. Especially as wealthier retirees from the Netherlands, the US and Canada settle on the island and drive prices up for everyone else. There's also the weight of the island's industrial past. The oil refinery built in 1918 powered Curaçao's economy for decades. But at a cost, the island has at times carried disproportionately high carbon emissions for its size. And underneath it all sits a deeper, unresolved question, shared by many former colonial territories. A relationship with the Netherlands that brings real stability and investment. But also old tensions around autonomy and what independence truly means. None of this erases what's beautiful about this island. But ignoring it would turn this story into advertising instead of truth. And it's the truth, even its uncomfortable parts, that makes everything else about Curaçao worth believing. So let's leave Curaçao for a moment and talk about something closer to home, your home. Most of us live somewhere fast, somewhere efficient, somewhere built on the assumption that more resources, more speed, more competition is always the answer. We measure success in growth, in scale, in never standing still. Curaçao never had any of that. No fertile land, no natural wealth, no guarantee it would survive being called useless. And somehow out of all of that absence, it built something most resource-rich places never managed to build at all. An identity people actually choose to protect. A language people kept alive on purpose. A history they refused to bury, even the painful parts. A trust between neighbors that no law had to enforce. And maybe that's why this year it made sense that a team of 158,000 people walked out against the champions of the world. Lost 7-1, scored anyway. And 6 days later stood in front of South America's best and refused to fall. One goalkeeper, 37 years old, made 15 saves in 90 minutes and earned this tiny island its first ever World Cup point. Not because anyone expected them to win, but because giving up was never really part of who they are. Curaçao was never meant to matter. It decided to anyway. Douchey, the people here say. Sweet, gentle, good. Maybe that's not just a word for an island. Maybe it's a way of asking how we want to live too.